In 1963, a new foray into manned spaceflight was announced by the U.S. Air Force. Initially slated for flight in late 1967 or early 1968, with an unmanned test and 5 manned missions through 1970, the Manned Orbiting Laboratory would operate as a near-Earth scientific outpost with vaguely defined military capability. When images of the general design of the mole and cutaways of the interior were made public, the illustrations lacked detail in roughly 60% of the orbital platform. Statements from President Lyndon B. Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara reassured that the mole would be used to explore the ability of man to function in space, function as a national space station, and would not be used to orbit nuclear weapons. Behind the scenes, memos to McNamara from the Secretary of State emphasized the importance of a scientific cover for the mole to make it acceptable to other nations, and the implications that it represented a militarization of space be rigorously avoided. The mole would be 57 feet long, 10 feet in diameter, with about 400 cubic feet of pressurized, livable space for its crew. The mole would launch with a modified Gemini B capsule containing the crew attached, using Titan III boosters. The Gemini capsule would remain attached to the top of the mole for the entire 30-day mission, after which the astronauts would return to and detach the capsule, leaving the mole and its 4,000 cubic feet of mystery space to go into controlled re-entry and burn up in the atmosphere. It wouldn't be until 2015 that the core of the mole mission would be declassified. An enormous telescopic camera developed by Eastman Kodak, codenamed Dorian. Aimed via smaller spotting telescopes, Dorian would be able to capture high-resolution images, a 1-foot target resolution, of the Soviet Union from orbit. McNamara held hopes for a wide variety of surveillance, testing of military equipment, and perhaps eventually aiming and firing weapons from orbit. Unfortunately for Mole and the Air Force, it wasn't to be, and the cancellation of Mole would mark the end of the Air Force's attempts to reach space independently of NASA. While Mole conducted Earth-based studies and tested equipment, NASA had astronauts in orbit. While Mole scrambled to build their Gemini B capsules before the team's contract ran out, research into unmanned robotic surveillance continued. When General Bernard Shriver retired in 1966, he took with him much of the top-level military passion for the Mole project. The escalating Vietnam War besieged Mole with budget cuts, and Eastman Kodak fell behind on the Dorian telescope. Despite the secrecy, the media gradually realized that the Mole was a spy platform, and costs continued to rise. When Nixon was elected in late 1968, the Mole was practically dead. The opposition from Congress, still eyeing the cheaper price tag on an unmanned spy satellite, and the slowly cottoning on public were joined by the CIA, which felt that unmanned satellite photography would be sufficiently high resolution. By mid-1969, Mole had died a quiet death. Its mission would later be partially filled by the Gambit and Hexagon series satellites, with an eventual resolution on Hexagon of 23 inches, with its telescopic camera built by Perkin-Elmer rather than Eastman Kodak. The technologies researched for Mole would eventually become part of the unmanned KH-11 Kennen series reconnaissance satellites, with a reported image resolution of 3 inches and video transmission. 7 of the 17 would-be Mole pilots ended up at NASA, and the fully tested manned spy telescope would never be constructed.